Here, use your jacket. My shoes are worth more than your life savings." That was the voice that sliced through the quiet hum of the corporate lobby. He was a young, powerful executive, and he was talking to me, the elderly janitor. He pointed a gleaming black shoe at me, the leather so polished it reflected my own stunned face. "Now," he commanded, his voice dripping with disdain, "before I lose what little patience I have left." He had no idea that single arrogant command would completely obliterate his entire world. My name is Arthur Vance, and my day had started like any other for the past 3 weeks in Palo Alto, California. I woke up before dawn, put on the simple gray jumpsuit of a contract cleaner, and drove to the headquarters of a company I happened to own. To everyone here, I was just Art, the quiet old man who emptied their trash cans and mopped their floors. It was an identity I had carefully constructed. The floor was cold against my knees. It was Italian marble, a detail I remembered signing off on years ago, chosen for its imposing, sterile beauty. Now, all I felt was its unforgiving chill seeping through the thin fabric of my pants. I was kneeling in the center of the vast glass-walled lobby of Innovate Dynamics, my lobby. Above me stood Caden Sharp. He was exactly as the board had described him, sharp by name, sharp by nature. His dark brown hair was styled in a severe modern cut, and his jaw was so angular it looked like it was carved from granite. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit, the kind that costs more than most people's cars, and on his feet were the source of his current rage, a pair of black Tom Ford leather shoes. A tiny, barely visible white scuff mark marred the perfect surface of the right shoe. He had been storming through the lobby, barking into his phone about some multi-million-dollar deal, when he'd accidentally brushed his foot against my cleaning cart. He stopped dead.
The fury that had been directed at someone on the phone was immediately transferred to me. He hung up and turned, his gray eyes locking onto me with an intensity that made the young receptionist at the front desk physically flinch. And now, here I was, on my knees, with dozens of employees either frozen in place or trying desperately to pretend they weren't watching. They were terrified, not for me, but of him. Their fear told me everything the quarterly reports never could. This was the culture Caden had built. "Well," he snapped, kicking his foot forward slightly. "I don't have all day. Are you deaf?" My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the zipper on my jacket. It wasn't from fear. It was a quiet, simmering anger, the likes of which I hadn't felt in decades. I had built this company from the ground up with my late wife, Eleanor. We started it in our garage, fueled by coffee and a belief that you could be successful without sacrificing your humanity. We treated our first employees like family. Seeing this man, this peacock of a CEO, pervert everything we stood for, it felt like a personal violation. But I had to see this through. I came here to observe, not to act. Not yet. The board in London, where I've lived for the last 10 years, had been concerned. Profits were up, but so was employee turnover. Anonymous reviews spoke of a toxic work environment. They wanted to send in a corporate consulting team. I told them I'd handle it my own way. I needed to see it with my own eyes. So I zipped down my jacket. It was a simple, worn thing, but it was warm. I slowly shrugged it off my shoulders. The silence in the lobby was deafening, broken only by the soft click of a keyboard from the reception desk. Caden let out an amused, condescending huff. He was enjoying this. He was making an example of me. I folded the jacket, my old, wrinkled hands moving with deliberate slowness.
My skin is fair, spotted with age, a map of my 72 years. I looked at my hands, then at his perfect polished shoe. I remembered working 2 jobs, my hands raw and calloused, to get the seed money for our first prototype. This man had no concept of what it meant to build something, gently wiped the scuff mark. It came away instantly. A speck of dust, nothing more. I looked up at him from my position on the floor. His face was a mask of smug triumph. "There," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "A simple task for a simple man. Now get your filthy cart out of my sight." He turned without another word and strode towards the elevators, his posture radiating an unassailable sense of self-importance. The invisible spell broke. People started moving again, talking in hushed tones, carefully avoiding my eyes. The young receptionist looked at me with an expression of deep pity, and I gave her a small, reassuring nod. It wasn't her fault.
I slowly got to my feet, my joints protesting. I put my jacket back on, the spot I'd used to clean his shoe now feeling tainted. I grabbed the handle of my cart and pushed it away, my reflection a stooped, gray figure in the gleaming marble. As I made my rounds, I could feel the aftershock of the incident. People whispered as I passed. They saw a humiliated old man. They had no idea they were looking at the ghost who owned the machine. For the next few hours, I cleaned offices and emptied bins, my mind a whirl. Caden's performance confirmed my worst fears. He wasn't just a demanding boss, he was a cruel one. He derived pleasure from belittling those he perceived as beneath him. Later, as I cleaned the hallway near the executive suites, I heard his voice booming from his corner office.
He was on a call, laughing. "The deal is done," he bragged. "The board will be thrilled. I think it's time I finally pull the trigger on that Porsche 911 Carrera. A little bonus for myself." His words were like poison ivy, wrapping around the soul of my company. We were meant to be about innovation, about creating technology that helped people. For him, it was just a vehicle to acquire more status symbols, more things to prove he was better than everyone else. My shift finally ended as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Silicon Valley. I changed out of my jumpsuit in the small janitor's closet, the smell of bleach and ammonia a strange comfort. I was just Arthur again. I walked through the lobby, which was now mostly empty. I paused at the spot where I had knelt. It was just a patch of marble, cold and indifferent. As I pushed through the large glass doors into the cool California air, I glanced up. Caden was in his office, standing by the window, looking down at me. Even from this distance, I could see the self-satisfied smirk on his face. He watched me, the lowly janitor, begin my walk away from the temple he commanded. He was probably savoring his victory, imagining me shuffling off to the bus stop to go home to a sad, lonely apartment. I didn't head for the bus stop. I walked to the curb at the edge of the circular driveway. A moment later, a car glided silently to a stop in front of me. It was long, black, and impossibly elegant. A Rolls-Royce Ghost, its paint so deep it looked like liquid night. My driver, James, emerged from the driver's side. He's been with me for over 20 years, a model of quiet professionalism in his crisp black suit. He walked around the car and opened the rear passenger door for me, his movements economical and precise. He nodded respectfully. "Good evening, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice calm and even, betraying no surprise at my janitor's attire.
"I trust your observations today were illuminating." "You have no idea, James," I said, a weary sigh escaping my lips. I slid into the back seat, the scent of rich leather and polished wood replacing the sterile air of the office. The door closed with a soft, satisfying thud, sealing me off from the world outside. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back one last time at the gleaming glass tower. I glanced up at Caden's window. I couldn't make out his expression anymore, but I didn't need to. I could feel his world beginning to crack, the smug certainty draining away, replaced by a cold, terrifying confusion. The janitor he had humiliated just got into a car worth more than his entire executive salary, and his day was about to get much, much worse. The heavy door of the Rolls-Royce Ghost closed with a sound like a bank vault sealing shut. The chaotic noise of the Palo Alto afternoon vanished, replaced by a profound, engineered silence. For a moment, I just sat there on the plush leather, breathing in the familiar scent of wood and hide. It was a world away from the smell of industrial cleaner that had clung to me just minutes before. As James guided the car smoothly into traffic, I looked back at the glass tower of Innovate Dynamics. High up in the corner office, Caden Sharp was still a silhouette against the window. I couldn't see his face, but I didn't need to. I could imagine the entire sequence of his emotions as if I were watching it on a screen. First, there would have been smug satisfaction. He'd see the old janitor walking away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. A perfect end to a perfect power play in the lobby. He would have felt a surge of superiority, a confirmation of his place in the universe. He, the master, me, the serf. Then, the Rolls-Royce would have appeared. A flicker of confusion. A car like that didn't just show up on this corporate campus unless a major client or a board member was visiting. He would have watched, intrigued as the chauffeur got out, and then he would have seen the chauffeur open the door for me, for Art, the janitor.
The gears in his sharp, calculating mind would have ground to a halt. It would not compute. The image would clash so violently with his worldview that his brain would momentarily reject it. He would think it was a mistake, a coincidence. Maybe the old man was related to the driver. But then he would have seen James address me as Mr. Vance. Even from that distance, the deference would have been unmistakable. And that is when the cold dread would have begun to seep in. The smugness would have evaporated, replaced by a frantic, desperate search for a logical explanation. There would be none. Illuminating is a gentle word for it, James, I said, finally breaking the silence. My voice was steady, but a deep weariness settled into my bones. James glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable as always, but his eyes held a flicker of concern. I take it the reports of a challenging corporate culture were not exaggerated. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Challenging? No, it's rotten, James. Rotten from the head down. I paused, my mind replaying the scene in the lobby, the faces of the other employees, the fear, the shame. He had me kneel in the middle of the lobby to wipe a speck of dust off his Tom Ford shoes with my jacket. I saw James's knuckles tighten on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. It was the only sign of emotion he allowed himself. For him, it was the equivalent of a primal scream. He had served with the British Special Forces before working for me. He valued dignity and respect above all else. I see, he said, his voice a low rumble. We drove in silence for a few blocks. I watched the manicured lawns and hyper-modern homes of Palo Alto slide by. This place had changed so much. When Eleanor and I started the company, it was just a sleepy university town. Now it was the global epicenter of ambition, a place where a man's worth was measured by his stock options and the brand of car he drove. Caden Sharp was the perfect embodiment of this new world. A memory of Eleanor surfaced, so clear it was painful. We were in our garage, celebrating our first small contract with a cheap bottle of champagne. She raised her plastic cup and said, "To building something that lasts, not just a product, Arthur, but a place where good people can do good work." Her face was smudged with grease, and she had never looked more beautiful. What would she think of what that place had become? A theater for the ego of a petty tyrant. The anger I had suppressed all day returned, no longer simmering, but cold and hard like steel. This wasn't just about a personal insult. This was about defending Eleanor's legacy. This was about everything we had ever believed in. I glanced down at my wrist. The simple, elegant face of my Patek Philippe Calatrava showed that it was late afternoon in California, which meant it was after midnight in London. Too bad. Some things couldn't wait. "James," I said, my tone shifting. The weariness was gone, replaced by quiet, absolute authority. "Get Sir Richard Davies on the line for me. Secure channel." "Right away, Mr. Vance," he replied. He pressed a button on the center console. A moment later, the refined, slightly panicked voice of the chairman of the board of Innovate Dynamics filled the car. "Arthur? Is everything all right? It's nearly 1 in the morning here." "I'm fine, Richard," I said calmly. "But I'm afraid the company is not." I could hear him sit up straighter in his bed, the rustling of sheets coming through the speaker. "What is it? What have you found?" "The preliminary numbers for this quarter are excellent." Caden has closed the Apex deal. Caden has closed many deals, Richard. That was never the issue, I said, keeping my voice level. The issue is the man himself. I came here to see if the rumors of a toxic environment were true. They are not. The reality is far worse. I then recounted the incident in the lobby. I didn't embellish or add emotion. I just stated the facts, clinically and precisely. I told him about kneeling on the marble floor, about using my jacket to clean his shoe, about the fear I saw in the eyes of the employees. When I finished, there was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Richard breathing, the sound shallow and rapid. "My God, Arthur," he finally whispered. I had no idea. His results have been so impressive.
His results have been achieved by burning out our best people and creating a culture of fear, I countered. He is a cancer, Richard, and you and the rest of the board have been so dazzled by the sheen on his quarterly reports that you failed to notice the disease spreading through the soul of this company. What do you want me to do? He asked, his voice trembling. He knew what was coming. He knew that as the quiet, reclusive owner of 51% of the company, my word was final. My $950 million net worth was tied almost entirely to this company, and I would not see it destroyed from within. You will call an emergency remote board meeting, effective immediately, I instructed. You will inform them that on my authority as the controlling shareholder, Caden Sharp's employment is terminated, effective immediately. His access to all company property, accounts, and communications is to be revoked, effective immediately. Arthur, the Apex deal, his severance package will be enormous, Richard began to stammer, thinking of the logistical and financial fallout. I don't care. I cut him off, my voice dropping to a near whisper, but carrying more weight than any shout.
We will honor the contract to the letter. Pay him whatever we must to make him disappear, but he will be gone by the time the sun rises in California. Am I clear? Yes, Richard said, his voice now small and subservient. Crystal clear, Arthur. Good, I said. I will be assuming direct oversight of the Palo Alto office for the foreseeable future. Have an announcement prepared for the staff. Let them know that change is coming. I ended the call. The silence returned to the car, but this time it felt different. It was the calm after a storm, the quiet hum of a decision made and an action set in motion. James expertly navigated the freeway, heading towards the private airfield. I leaned my head back against the soft leather. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a profound sense of responsibility. Firing Caden was the easy part. It was like pulling a weed. But the soil of my company had been poisoned. The real work, the hard work of healing the culture and reminding everyone what Innovate Dynamics was truly supposed to be about, was just beginning. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it would be the fight of my life. The call with Richard ended, and the profound silence of the Rolls-Royce cabin returned. It felt heavier now, filled with the weight of the decision I had just made. A man's career, his entire identity, had just been vaporized with a few quiet words from the back of a car. I felt no satisfaction, just a grim sense of necessity, like a surgeon removing a diseased organ. "To the airfield, Mr. Vance?" James asked, his voice pulling me from my thoughts. His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. He already knew the answer. For the past decade, every problem in the US was handled remotely from my home in London. A call, an email, a directive. Then back to the quiet routine of my life. "Yes, James," I confirmed, though the word felt hollow. "Let's go home." We drove on, the city lights of Silicon Valley beginning to twinkle against the darkening sky. Each light represented a dream, a startup, another company full of people striving to build something. Had we become one of the soulless giants we once rallied against? A place where a CEO's ego was more important than the dignity of his employees? The thought was a cold stone in my gut. I looked at my hands, the skin thin and spotted. These were not the hands of the young man who had soldered circuit boards in a garage. They were the hands of a billionaire, a man who had become a ghost in his own company, a name on a letterhead. I had allowed this to happen. My distance, my trust in the board and their glowing reports had created the vacuum that a man like Caden Sharp was only too happy to fill. My phone buzzed. It was a secure message from Richard. It was a single sentence. "He's calling me, non-stop. He sounds unhinged." I imagined Caden in his glass-walled office, the smugness from earlier now curdled into pure panic. He would have seen me get into the Rolls-Royce. He would have heard James call me Mr. Vance. He would have immediately started running the name through his mental database. Vance. Arthur Vance. The reclusive, almost mythical founder who hadn't been seen at headquarters in a decade. The man who owned the majority of the company. The janitor. The two identities would be warring in his mind, refusing to merge. It would seem like a prank, a nightmare. He would be scrambling, his sharp mind desperately trying to find an angle, a way to spin this. But there was no spin. There was only the cold, hard truth he was now facing.
The car turned onto the highway, heading south towards the private airport in San Jose. The lights of the cars flowed past us like rivers of light. I felt detached from it all, an observer in my own life. Eleanor would have hated this.
She would have been in that office every day. She would have known every employee's name. She would have never let a man like Caden Sharp pass the front door, let alone into the CEO's chair. She would have fired him herself, I murmured aloud. Indeed she would have, sir, James said softly. And she wouldn't have waited for the end of the day. He was right. My inaction, my preference for a quiet life in London, was a betrayal of her memory. I had been tending to her legacy like a museum curator, preserving it under glass instead of keeping it alive and breathing. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Richard. I answered. Arthur, thank God. He sounded breathless. I've just spoken to him, or rather, I listened to him shout. And? I asked, my voice flat. He's falling apart. He said he saw you. He described you perfectly as the janitor. He said you got into a Rolls-Royce. He kept saying it was impossible, that someone was playing a sick joke. He demanded to know who Mr. Vance was. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him the board had convened and his employment was terminated, effective immediately. I told him security would be escorting him from the building. He started screaming. He threatened lawsuits. He said he built this quarter's profits, that he was the company. He was a custodian, Richard, nothing more, I said, and a poor one at that. Has security been dispatched? Yes, they're on their way to his office now. His corporate accounts are frozen. The termination letter is in his inbox. I pictured the scene. The 2 uniformed security guards arriving at the pristine corner office. The humiliation for Caden, a man who lived and breathed status, would be absolute. It would be a public execution of his career, far more damaging than being forced to wipe a shoe. But again, I felt no pleasure in it. It was just a necessary, ugly step. We were nearing the airport now. I could see the lights of the runway in the distance. My jet, the Gulfstream G650, would be waiting, ready to whisk me back across the Atlantic to my quiet, orderly life. I could be in my own bed by morning. I could read the reports, approve the new interim CEO, and let this whole ugly chapter fade into memory. But the image of the young receptionist's face, filled with pity for me, flashed in my mind. The image of the other employees, frozen in fear. They deserved better. Eleanor deserved better. I leaned forward. James. Sir, turn the car around. James didn't question the order. He simply signaled, and at the next exit, the Rolls-Royce smoothly reversed its course, heading back north toward San Francisco. Where are we headed, sir? He asked. The Ritz-Carlton, I said. Book me the presidential suite, and contact my tailor in the city. I'll need a few things by morning. I've been wearing a janitor's uniform for 3 weeks. I think it's time I started dressing for the job I actually have. A long silence filled the car. Then, for the first time all day, I saw a genuine small smile touch the corners of James's lips in the rearview mirror. It will be my pleasure, Mr. Vance. Welcome back. An hour later, I was standing in a suite that was larger than my first apartment. The city lights of San Francisco sprawled out beneath me, a carpet of diamonds. My janitor's clothes were in a heap on the floor, waiting to be disposed of. I had showered, the hot water washing away the grime, and I hoped some of the shame of the day. A delivery had arrived from my tailor. I put on a crisp white shirt, tailored gray trousers, and a simple, dark blue blazer. As I knotted a dark Hermes tie, I looked at my reflection. The man looking back at me was not Art, the janitor. He was not the reclusive ghost from London. He was Arthur Vance, the founder and owner of Innovate Dynamics. And he had work to do. I picked up my phone and made one last call, this time to a woman named Maria Flores, the head of human resources. I had hired her myself 25 years ago. She was sharp, empathetic, and, most importantly, she had a spine of steel. Mr. Vance, she answered, her voice filled with shock. She hadn't heard from me directly in years. Maria, I said warmly, it's been a long time. I'm in the city. I need you to do something for me. First thing tomorrow morning, I want you to call an all-hands meeting for the entire Palo Alto office. Make it mandatory. Of course, Mr. Vance, she said, recovering quickly. What should I tell them the agenda is? I walked over to the window, looking down at the city below. Tell them, I said, my voice quiet but firm, that the owner is coming home, and it's time for a change. The next morning, the California sun streamed through the panoramic windows of the Ritz-Carlton suite, but I barely noticed. I was already dressed, standing before the mirror, adjusting the Hermes tie I had chosen. The man looking back at me was a stranger. For 3 weeks, I had seen a janitor in the mirror. Now, I saw a CEO. The clothes didn't make the man, but they were a uniform, a statement of intent. Today, I was going to war for the soul of my company. James was waiting for me downstairs. The Rolls-Royce Ghost was polished to a mirror shine. As we drove south on Highway 101, the journey felt completely different from all the trips I had made in my old, unassuming sedan. This time, I wasn't an invisible old man going to a thankless job. I was the owner, returning to his property. And I felt the weight of every single employee on my shoulders. We didn't pull into the general parking lot. James drove directly up to the front entrance, the same circular driveway where he had picked me up the day before.
He got out and opened my door. As I stepped out, I saw the young receptionist from yesterday through the glass doors. Her eyes widened, first in recognition of the car, then in utter confusion as she saw me. She saw Art, the janitor, emerging from a $500,000 car dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. Her mind couldn't reconcile the two images. I gave her a small, gentle nod as I walked through the doors. The lobby, the scene of my humiliation, was buzzing with nervous energy. Everyone was heading towards the main auditorium. The email from Maria Flores had sent shockwaves through the company. An all-hands mandatory meeting called by the HR department on behalf of the owner. Rumors were flying. Most assumed it was about Caden's abrupt, unexplained disappearance the night before. As I walked across the polished marble floor, a path seemed to clear before me. People stopped their conversations and stared. They recognized me. They saw Art, but they saw the suit, the confidence, the car outside. They saw an impossible contradiction. I heard whispers behind me, a rising tide of confusion and speculation. Is that Art? What is he doing dressed like that? Did he win the lottery? I ignored them and headed straight for the auditorium. Maria was waiting for me at the door. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She looked me up and down, a flicker of a smile on her lips. "It's good to see you again, Arthur," she said, her voice low. "It's been too long." "It has, Maria," I replied. "I apologize for letting things get to this point." "No need," she said, her expression hardening slightly. "We're just glad you're here to fix it. The room is full. They're terrified and confused. They think there are going to be mass layoffs." "The only layoff that was needed has already happened," I assured her. "Let's go." She led me through a side door to the backstage area. Through the curtain, I could hear the murmur of hundreds of voices.
It was the sound of a company holding its breath. "I'll introduce you," Maria said. "No," I told her. "Just tell them the meeting is starting. I'll handle the introduction myself." She nodded, understanding. She walked onto the stage, and the room fell silent. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming on such short notice. As the email stated, this meeting has been called by the owner of Innovate Dynamics. He has a message he wishes to deliver to you all in person. Please give him your full attention." Maria stepped back, and that was my cue. I walked out from behind the curtain and into the bright lights of the stage. I stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. And for a moment, the entire room was completely, utterly silent. A silence so deep you could feel it. Then the whispers started again, louder this time. I saw people pointing. I saw their shocked expressions. I made eye contact with the young receptionist in the third row. Her face was pale, her mouth slightly agape. I leaned into the microphone. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the massive room. "My name is Arthur Vance." I let the name hang in the air for a moment. It meant nothing to most of them. I was a ghost. Many of you, however, have known me for the past 3 weeks as Art, I continued. A collective audible gasp went through the auditorium. It was a physical wave of sound, a ripple of pure shock. The confusion on their faces morphed into stunned disbelief. I saw people turning to their neighbors, their expressions asking the same silent question: "Is this a joke?" "I am the founder of this company," I said,
letting the truth settle. My late wife, Eleanor, and I started Innovate Dynamics in our garage 30 years ago. I've spent the last decade living abroad, and I entrusted the leadership of this company to the board and to men like Mr. Sharp. That was my mistake.
My eyes scanned the crowd, meeting as many gazes as I could. I came here 3 weeks ago, undercover, because I heard whispers that the company we built was becoming a place of fear, not innovation. I needed to see it for myself. And yesterday, in the lobby right outside this room, I saw all I needed to see. The shame in the room was palpable. Everyone who had witnessed the incident looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I saw a culture where a leader believed it was acceptable to humiliate a subordinate for sport, I said, my voice growing stronger. To derive power from cruelty. That is not who we are. That is not what this company was ever meant to be. Suddenly, there was a commotion at the back of the auditorium. The main doors burst open, and there stood Caden Sharp. He looked like a man who had been through a war. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and his face was a mask of pure fury. 2 security guards were trying to restrain him. "You!" he screamed, his voice raw and breaking. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You are nobody. You're a janitor. This is my company. I built it." The entire room turned to look at him, a disgraced king raging at the gates of the kingdom he had lost. The security guards grabbed his arms, but he struggled, his eyes wild. "I closed the Apex deal," he yelled, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. "I was going to buy a Porsche 911 Carrera with my bonus. You can't do this to me. I am Caden Sharp." I looked at him, not with anger, but with a profound sense of pity. He was a hollow man, defined only by his title and his possessions. Without them, he was nothing. "Get him out of here," I said quietly into the microphone. The security guards, hearing my command, finally managed to haul him out of the room, his shouts echoing down the hall before the doors closed, sealing him out of our lives for good. I took a deep breath and turned back to my employees. "That," I said, gesturing to the doors, "is not leadership. That is ego. And effective today, the era of ego at Innovate Dynamics is over." I spent the next 20 minutes laying out my vision. I didn't talk about profit margins or stock prices. I talked about respect. I talked about collaboration. I talked about Eleanor's founding principle, that our greatest asset was not our patents or our technology, but our people. I announced that Maria Flores would be leading a company-wide culture review. I promised to personally oversee the transition and to remain here in Palo Alto for as long as it took to make this a place we could all be proud of again. When I finished, I didn't wait for applause. I simply said, "Thank you. Now let's get back to work." I stepped down from the stage and walked up the center aisle. The feeling in the room had completely transformed. The fear was gone, replaced by a tentative, fragile sense of hope. People looked at me with a newfound respect, not because I was a billionaire owner, but because I had shown them what I stood for. As I passed the young receptionist, she looked up at me, her eyes shining. "Thank you, Art," she whispered. I smiled. "My name is Arthur," I said gently, "but you can call me Art." I walked out of the auditorium and back into the lobby. The marble floor gleamed under the morning light. It was no longer a place of humiliation. It was the heart of my company, and I was finally home. What I did to Caden was swift and decisive, but I wonder, was it the right way? He was a destructive force, but I ended his career in an instant. And you, would you have done it differently?